Welcome and good morning to the 2022 Lions Youth of the Year National Final. Conventioneers, this morning you'll be entertained with presentations from 5 of Australia's most influential young school students. I say 5 because unfortunately one of our cohort had to go home yesterday. He managed to catch the dreaded bug, which I think sent a couple of governors home too. We considered using the Zoom option, which is an option for us, but Aaron, who is still young enough to participate again next year, decided that the experience of relating to the national judging panel and to you, the audience, was more important than trying to possibly get through to some other prize. Our prime focus, of course, is to provide an opportunity for the young people to experience success without a threat of failure. And that's what we call this all about. So, to me, becoming a national finalist is success that only 6 students achieve in any one year. So we wish Aaron well and recognise that his decision shows maturity beyond his years. So Aaron, if you're watching, all the best, mate, and good luck for the future. The interviews were conducted yesterday. 70% of the scores were allocated at that time. So now I'd like to introduce our 5 state winners, typo there, and coming up onto the stage with their respective district coordinator, state coordinator. So Harshitha Pedireddy from Q districts with Rob Craig, Magnus Mulhall, V districts, with State Director, State Coordinator Colin Russell, Emily Ann, N districts with Peter Perry, Huda Zaidi, with W districts, Margaret Am and Eugenie O'Rourke, T district with Russell Cairns. Getting things on pieces of paper is always fraught with danger. So I'd now like to introduce our judges, and recognising most sincerely the effort that they put into this program, and without them, of course, we couldn't run this event. And in no particular order, actually. Selby Lynn Nicholas, Channel 9's news producer at this stage, and former radio producer at 6PR, 3AW, 2GB, good, and current producer of the features and forward planning for the 9 News. Selby Lynn. We set Selby Lynn up at the head of the table, and so she was instantly voted as the chairperson of the judges. Helen Herbert. Helen helped me out tremendously at the last moment because one of the judges I had came down with COVID and they had to pull out. So Helen stepped in. Helen's a local South Australian girl and director of the family manufacturing business and volunteer in many charities. Thank you, Helen. Kelly Pan. Kelly was the former Victorian State winner of the Youth of the Year and is a law and arts student and board member of the Young Diplomats Society, Youth Affairs Council of Victoria and Youth Law. Youth Law. John, where'd you go? Here you are. John Harris, from Williamstown, Victoria, retired union official, youth worker, and currently volunteers in many local charities. I'll keep the family connections out of it. And finally, Zoe Peters was our national winner last year and is currently working at a school and doing her gap year from university. So, welcome, judges. Thank you very much for your time. Now, I hope I've got this right, guys. Our two timekeepers, Colin Stevens and Peter Perry. Am I right? Good. And our chaperones, Margaret and Russell. Yes, sir. Good. And Yvonne's going to usher the students in and out when they go to the quiet room. So, our first speaker today to respond to the impromptu questions is Harshitha. So while the other four contestants go with the chaperones to the green room and the state coordinators go to their allotted positions, the impromptu questions can be a breeze or they can be a challenge. So while the four contestants are leaving the auditorium, I'll just ask Harshitha about one of her questions. So Harshitha, would you like to come here? Sorry?
You want us to go now?
Yes. All go to your places, timekeepers, and get rid of all these pieces of paper. Harshitha had a question like team cats, team dogs, or nothing, and I couldn't work out really what that was going to be about. So, do you want to tell us what you decided, or how you dealt with that question?
Yes, of course. It was a very tricky question, I've got to say, not the quite profound political questions that we get used to. And not having a cat or a dog myself, it was quite tricky to come at. I think I just jumped between the positives of having a dog and the positives of having a cat as well. But one of my favourite lines probably would have been when I was speaking about how independent a cat can be and how low maintenance they are, until you have to wash them. Then it might just be easier to get a new cat.
Thank you very much. Now, do you want to introduce yourself to the...
Of course, my name is Harshitha Pedireddy, as Ken has so lovelyly already said. I'm from Rockhampton. I am a grades 12 student in the Rockhampton Grammar School, and I'm representing the Fitzroy Lions Club. Yes, after grade 12, I hope to enter a politics, philosophy and economics course in university, hopefully at ANU. And I hope that after that I'll be able to either go into politics or into international relations, working either with the United Nations or UNICEF. My personal hobbies, I'm an avid musician. I play the trombone and the violin, and I'm also a bit of a poet. I like to write a bit of poetry in my spare time. And obviously, like any teenager, I love watching movies and TV. My Netflix account is an absolute mess at the moment. One of the things that I'm most passionate about is probably education and improving the education system in Queensland and in Australia. Environmental goals are also a passion of mine, making sure that we are able to move into renewable resources and environmentally friendly technology. And I think the final thing that I'm most passionate about is giving back to my community. It is my belief that we are not truly a member of our community until we are able to build each other up and make sure that we are supporting each other no matter what.
Now, the impromptu questions, as you may or may not know, but the students do, they've all been briefed with this, and of course they've done it through their rounds. But we have two questions for the contestants, and they're all familiar with the following procedure. I will read the question once and then place a written copy on the lectern. I will repeat the question, and the time will begin at the end of me asking the question for the second time. There is no requirement to speak for the full time. Penalties do apply if you go over the 2 minutes. There is no right or wrong answer. Ready?
All ready.
Your first question, Harthitha. If you could travel back 50 years, what advice would you give your grandparents? If you could travel back 50 years, what advice would you give your grandparents?
My grandparents are from India. They lived in a beautiful country at a time where they were still ruled by the British and they had just reached independence. In a country that is not as fortunate as we are, I would give them the advice to try and give back to their own community and help to build up the area in which they live. One of the biggest things that I think the Lions stand for is making sure that when you are a part of your community, you do what you can to build everyone up and to give back to the certain areas like education and those who are living with disabilities to make sure that we are all part of a healthy and strong community. The advice that I would give to my grandparents is that the world cannot move forward without their wisdom, without their energy, without their care. We would not be where we are today without the ingenuity of our forefathers. The one thing that I think would be the most important is to make sure that they stay on the front foot of technology developments and maybe put a little bit of money into the internet when it comes out. You know, a nice little nest egg for the future generations. Another important aspect would be to make sure that when they do have children, they ensure that their education is the best that it possibly can be. Take that extra step for a uni degree. Take that extra step to make sure that they are equipped for the future. I love my grandparents. They're absolutely wonderful people, and I would be happy to speak to them in the past.
Okay, question number 2. What do students need to learn at school that they currently do not? What do students need to learn at school that they currently do not?
I feel like it's a bit of a cliche, but I do not know how to do taxes. I really, really wish someone had taught me how to do that. In fact, the other day I just opened an investment account with the CommBank, and some of the stuff that they have on there is absolutely mind-blowing. It's a wonderful thing, I think, to be able to manage your own finances and to be able to have that economic security for the future, but it's something that we simply do not learn. In high school, a lot of us get our first jobs, working at Macca's or maybe behind the counter at IGA. But one of the things that we never learn is, how do we make the best of that money? I know the feeling when we get our first paycheck, we're so enthralled, the only thing we want to do is just go and get those new pair of shoes. Those Nikes that just came out, they're really pretty. But it's not exactly the most stable economic mindset, is it? And I think it's definitely something that in this time of turbulent economy and with prices, cost of living going up, it's something that we definitely have to teach our children. So something that we should learn at school to better equip us for the future is how to manage our finances, how to do taxes, how to invest, so that we can be in the best possible position we can be for the future.
You want to just sit there? Yeah. Now you can relax. Our next speaker is Magnus. Magnus was asked on his rounds, describe what a perfect day would look like to you, and brought back to him the perennial question that we had asked a few years ago about if we looked under your bed, what would we find? I think that question's become so famous we can never ever use it again. So how did you found that a bit tricky, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I arrived in Carisbrook and I was completely expecting a really difficult political question or a question about the environment or something like that. And I got up and I was ready. I was prepared to answer those questions. And I was presented with this one question asking me to explain how many Weet-Bix I have in the morning. And it struck me, it took me by surprise, to say the least. It took a couple of seconds to adjust, but then after that, I was able to adapt, thankfully. But yeah, I have 3 Weet-Bix, by the way. Very good.
Would you like to introduce yourself now?
Sure. As Ken said, I'm Magnus. I'm from Melbourne. I go to Melbourne High School. I play water polo. I play a couple of musical instruments, and yeah, I enjoy water polo. That's essentially me.
Thank you. Now, Magnus, your first question. If you could travel back 50 years, what advice would you give your grandparents?
The first thing...
Hang on, I'll ask.
Yep. Okay.
You got thinking time.
Yeah.
If you could travel back 50 years, what advice would you give your grandparents?
When I first think about this question, I think political, climate change, things like that. But when I think about my relationship with my grandparents, it's not about politics, it's not about the environment, it's about what they mean to me. As a kid, I grew up and Mum and Dad were both working parents, so they had to go out and work every week, essentially. And my grandparents, I have an older brother, my grandparents would come over and they'd take Oscar, my older brother, and I on these amazing trips. We'd go to, parklands, we'd go to museums, we'd go to the zoo, and that formed the basis of my childhood. It was amazing. I have these amazing memories of going to parklands and seeing these fantastic sculptures in the pastures and things like that. And I think if I could tell my grandparents one thing, it would be change nothing, because it's meant so much to me having them around, both while I was developing as a child and then also having them as mentors as I've grown up through my teenage years and then now becoming an adult. So I think ultimately I'd say thank you, first of all, and don't change a thing. Treat my dad well, because he'll be treating me. And so raise dad how you raised him, so dad can raise me well. But yeah, I think I'd just say thank you and continue doing what you do, because I just have these amazing memories with them. So yeah, just keep doing what you're doing. Oh, the suspense. can take a breath.
Okay, Magnus, question 2. What do students need to learn at school that they currently do not? What do students need to learn at school that they currently do not?
As a student, you come into high school at year 7 and you leave at year 12. And the one constant thing, it might be maths or your hatred for maths, or it might be English and your dislike for English, but one of the constants in high school is an exam. When I came into school at year 7, I had a test thrust into my face for each of my subjects, and I was told that this would determine whether I was an intelligent student or a non-intelligent student. And being year 7 me, being lazy me, I failed a lot of those tests and ended up doing pretty poorly in them. And I was told because of that I was just in the average class, I wasn't in the accelerated class. The same thing happened in year 9 when I applied for Melbourne High School. I didn't perform well on this test, this one-dimensional test broken down into 4 A, B, Cs and a D that you had to circle for every question. So when I think of high school and what students are learning as they go through from year 7 to 12, I think that they're encouraged to believe that there's this one-dimensional form of intelligence, that your intelligence as a person, your value as a person is reduced to 4 bubbles and a question and a grey lead pencil. So I think ultimately what we can do to better prepare our students for the outside world that isn't reduced to just 4 bubbles is tell them and teach them there's something more to life than just a test. High school isn't about a test, it's about experiences. It's about friendships, it's about memories, and it's about learning about things that are just, not just, the quadratic formula, memorizing how to add and subtract. Life is more than just maths, it's more than just tests. So I think what we can do as members of the community, as teachers, as leaders, is teach students to think outside the box. Thank you.
Yes. Our next entrant is Emily. She came across a question that, is it time for Australia to become a republic? Oh, woohoo. So, Emily, when you were talking about Australia as a republic, were you able to dodge all the politics of it?
I thought a little bit about it and I was worried. I was worried that if I said the wrong thing, some people might have a grudge against me. But I had some similar opinions to the other contestants. So it was pretty similar across the board. All of us thought that Australia should become a republic. We were all for Australia's independence at that point so we could do more on the global stage as a country, just standing on our own, not just an ally of the United States or the United Kingdom. So.
Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Hello, my name is Emily Ann and I come from Sydney, New South Wales, and I come from James Roos Agricultural High School. And despite being a city girl, I have a very big passion for agriculture and for farming. So I will be taking HSC Agriculture in a few months later this year. And after year 12, I hope to complete a tertiary course in medicine, hopefully at Western Sydney University, and I hope to specialise in geriatrics. And what geriatrics is that we specialise in taking care of elderly patients. So hopefully I can complete my course successfully and all of you can be in good hands, hopefully.
Yes, you're in the right place. So, Emily, your first question is, if you could travel back 50 years, what advice would you give your grandparents? If you could travel back 50 years, what advice would you give your grandparents?
If I could travel back 50 years, the one piece of advice that I would like to give my grandparents is to not be scared to break the rules, to not be scared to step out of the box and do something that has never been done before. Because 50 years ago, particularly for women, there were a lot of stereotypes saying what we could do, what we should do, and what we shouldn't do. And a lot of people were scared to break these stereotypes. And people still are a little scared to break these stereotypes today. But what I see now is, particularly in our youth, we are not scared. We are not scared of pushing the envelope. We are not scared of pushing the boundaries of what we can and what we shouldn't do. And I believe that this is definitely a sentiment that could have been carried out 50 years ago. And it would have been incredible to see the achievements that we could have been able to have 50 years ago if we were just able to take that risk, just to push that envelope a little more. Because even if someone tells you that you cannot do something, that is never a good enough reason not to do something. Because if you truly believe in yourself, if you truly have a passion for doing something, then you should break the rules a little bit. Push the envelope a little bit, because that is how we change the world one step at a time. Thank you.
Your second question. What do students need to learn at school that they currently do not? What do students need to learn at school that they currently do not?
I believe that an incredibly important skill that we need to teach our students in schools today is how to consider everyone else's perspectives. And what our school curriculum currently does is that there is a textbook. We go home, we read the textbook, we write a few notes, and then we take an exam. But what that doesn't do is prepare us for real life. It doesn't prepare us to go into the workplace and negotiate with our other colleagues and other people that we have to work with. And what that means is that we don't have our youth prepared at their best to perform at the best within the workplaces and create the solutions that are going to propel our world forward into the future. And I believe that being able to consider everyone else's perspectives, being able to consider what everyone sees on their side of the story is incredibly important for us to foster skills such as teamwork. Because if you are unable to see things from someone else's perspective, if you are unable to see their point of view, then there is nothing that we can do of collaboration. We cannot have teamwork, and we cannot have effective communication and effective working together within our workplaces and within our future to create solutions. So I definitely believe that within the school curriculum, there need to be more opportunities for students to learn how to negotiate with other people, how to work with people who may have views on the complete opposite end of the spectrum as you. And it is important to reach a compromise, to reach a solution where everyone's priorities are considered to a certain extent. And that is how we prepare our youth in schools to be the best people that they possibly can, and to be the best global citizens who will be at the forefront of the change that we can achieve in the world if we can implement this within our school curriculum. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Huda. Now, Huda was asked a couple of questions in this line, but she thought this one was a challenge. If you could be any animal in the world, what would you be and why? So how did you deal with that one? Come.
Well, I actually found it quite tricky, even though it's asked at every single slumber party that I've been to. But I just tackled it the way that I would answer my friends, and that was the most authentic way to do it.
Thank you. Now, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Definitely. So my name is Huda Zaidi. I'm from Perth Modern School in WA. And what I am really passionate about is voice. Now, not the TV show, but our voices, especially the ones that aren't being heard in our society today, and making sure that we're trying to amplify them so that we can create a community which is based on empathy and knowledge rather than hatred and inability to listen to others. Thank you.
Now, your first question, Huda. If you could travel back 50 years, what advice would you give your grandparents? I need 3 arms. If you could travel back 50 years, what advice would you give your grandparents?
I have a feeling that even if I went back 50 years, my grandparents would still be the ones giving me advice. But regardless, my family has always had a long history of migration. And 50 years ago, my grandparents would have just migrated to newly made Pakistan. I would give them the advice to keep persevering the way they are. Because when you are migrating to a new place and you're starting over again, the best thing to have is resilience. Resilience is actually a quality that we could have in our day-to-day lives. And I think that if we keep up this quality of resilience as a society, which we have especially done with the COVID-19 pandemic, we can go really far. So the best advice that I could give my grandparents, if any, would be resilience. Thank you.
Your second question. What do students need to learn at school that they currently do not? What do students need to learn at school that they currently do not?
Our schooling system in Australia is one of the best in the world. However, that is in regards to our academics and our extracurricular opportunities, which are bountiful. But it isn't in regards to how we take care of ourselves as students and as people who will live in the future and face multiple different issues. Our schooling system currently does not focus as much as it should on the mental health and well-being of students. Because it is so important when you have multiple children of extremely high proportions across Australia complaining about anxiety and complaining about mental health issues that our schooling system shifts its focus to this aspect. Especially with all of the current situations in Australia and in the world, wars, floods, bushfires. It is in our best interest to prepare our students both mentally and physically and academically for the life ahead. Whether it be small things like implementing a quiet room, or whether it be small things like including a little bit of meditation in our day-to-day life, mental health and well-being should be an extremely important part of our education system. Thank you.
Sit over there. Please welcome Eugenie. Eugenie was asked, why is the northwest coast of Tasmania a great place to live? I was told by one of my other governors that you got into Tasmania, you hopped off the boat at Devon, drove for 2 hours and hopped back on the boat. Shoot me down.
I mean, it does take more like 6. I'm just introducing myself.
How did you handle that? Did you think it was a...
It was a really good question. North West Coast is an amazing community, so it's offered me so many different opportunities, and I'm really grateful to have lived there. It's amazing.
Okay. Oh, no. You want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Well, hello everyone. I'm Eugenie O'Rourke. I live in Leith in Tasmania. I attend Don College. Next year I plan to pursue studying in STEM or economics. I really enjoyed getting to pursue so many different education opportunities and sporting and culture opportunities to further my understanding and really define where I want to head in life. So, thank you everyone.
Your first question. If you could travel back 50 years, what advice would you give to your grandparents? I'll read it again. If you could travel back 50 years, what advice would you give your grandparents?
I must admit, my grandparents have given me so much incredible advice. So the opportunity to give them advice is one not so expected to me. They're very wise people. But the advice that I would present to them is the idea of pushing boundaries of what is socially acceptable and the people we're allowed to interact with. It's really important that the steps we made in society to become more open to accepting different cultures and accepting people from different countries and who have had different experiences from what we've had. Opening your arms to see the different ideas that you wouldn't have thought of and be open to discussion is so important in our lives and our world for growth of our own perspective and growth of our community. Accepting that we don't all have to share the same views and we don't all have to share the same opinions on every issue is a really important part of moving forward and progressing with solutions that work for not only ourselves, but for the wider community. So having the opportunity to kind of give them the advice to be open with discussions and open with their opinions, to accept the people around them for who they are, and accept that everyone's experiences contribute differently to the way in which they would like to move forward. And combining and culminating all of this experience is the most valuable way of creating a community and a society that's ready for the future and ready for each new challenge and each new evolution. Thank you.
Okay, your second question. Excuse me. Your second question. Bless you. What do students need to learn at school that they currently do not? What do students need to learn at school that they currently do not?
The knowledge we learn at school is a very valuable part of our moving forward into the community and progressing into our adulthoods. The school system very much focuses on academic fields to progress our knowledge in very specific environments, but it struggles to kind of move beyond that into kind of life skills in often senses, and it's thought that it's very much focused on pushing us forward academically, but doesn't give us the same awareness in a social environment and in being our own individuals. And beyond this, we also need to be open with having discussions and having new opinions and being able to work with the people around us and prioritise the importance of our community. Because oftentimes as young adults, it's easy to not see the value in the people around us and the generosity of our community and holding up opportunities for each new generation. And leaving school, it's important to be able to recognise the opportunities we've been given by those around us and be able to form our own opinions, not only from our teachers or from our parents, but take in opinions from the wider community to progress our own perspectives. So at school, I think it's really important for there to be an open environment where students can not only progress their academic fields, but also progress in a sense of learning more life skills, as well as the opportunity to discuss and to be open with each new opinion and learn from each other and learn to be a part of a community and be a part of a strong environment that contributes back and being able to pass on your knowledge to others and accept their knowledge as your own to contribute. Thank you.
Well done. Take a seat over there and relax. I made a note here about how ghastly these impromptu questions are, but I was just astounded at how they were answered. Yeah. So now it's time for the prepared speeches. We'll maintain the order that they were in for the impromptus. And just quickly, the time will start on the utterance of their first word, nothing to do with me. And after 4 minutes, the bell will sound once. A penalty is incurred if they do not proceed beyond 4.5 minutes of the elapsed time, and they do need to finish the sentence they're on at the expiry of 5 minutes. So please welcome back to the lectern Harshita, and her speech title is Let Them Flourish.
To build up and not destroy. A lion's value that promotes community and respect, something our world is in dire need of. But much of society is governed by criticism and denigration, a culture epitomized by tall poppy syndrome. Good morning, esteemed guests and adjudicators. Tall poppy syndrome is an inherently Australian cultural phenomenon where our high achievers in any occupation are cut down by their peers. Society ruthlessly slanders and devalues the achievements of entrepreneurs, athletes, and award winners. But where has this culture come from? And why is it so encapsulated in our community? The answer lies with egalitarianism, which is the equality of all people, and it is one of our greatest defining characteristics. But it's the toxic corruption of this principle that fuels tall poppy syndrome. When an Australian strives for greatness, they're elevating themselves above their peers and are no longer seen as equal. The overarching response is to rip them down through envy, resentment, and disdain, instead of celebrating their successes. This culture is spearheaded by our media. Take legendary Olympian Ian Thorpe, who was hounded by the tabloids over his body, his sexuality, and his retirement. Ultimately, that drove him out of our country. An Australian icon, pushed out of Australia by Australians. And he isn't alone. Julia Gillard, Grace Tame, and Greg Norman have all endured and spoken out against this pernicious attitude. A 2018 study revealed just how extensive tall poppy syndrome has become. A staggering 87% of respondents said that their achievements were undermined in their workplace, and a further 65% said they had faced mental health implications because of it. Insomnia, loss of confidence, depression, and even post-traumatic stress disorder were just some of the common responses to their ordeal. We are forcing people to choose between their mental health and personal success. As the land of opportunity, that is simply unacceptable. I'm quite close to this topic, as I've felt the ramifications personally. This is my second year through grade 12 because of the sheer torment that my peers had put me through last year. I was the dux of my grade and newly appointed school captain. I was so fulfilled by my achievements, but my classmates were not so happy. Friends turned against me, rumors spread, and soon even parents were ridiculing me to my face. I was a pariah, shunned by social groups, and the toll that it took on my mental health was debilitating. A once self-assured young girl was now lying in bed, unable to move, praying for it all to be over. What was the point in trying if my achievements were weaponized against me? I was worthless. This tall poppy syndrome is spreading like a weed through our community. It chokes the creativity and innovation of our society by chopping down its most successful contributors. But what does that say about our future as a country? Progress and pioneering would abate. We would devolve into a stagnant civilization. Think of our greatest innovations: the cochlear implant, electronic pacemakers, even the original Google Maps came from remarkable Australians and would not have been possible in this poisonous environment. High achievers who are faced with this scrutiny are more hesitant to chase success, to further their careers. So how many future innovators are we destroying? How long until we decimate Australia's future? This tall poppy syndrome does nothing but pick people apart like petals off a flower. I stand before you hoping to spread awareness of this toxic culture so we can move towards changing it. I implore you, teach your children, your grandchildren, to let the poppies flourish and to flourish alongside them.
Okay, please welcome back to the lectern Magnus, whose subject is the bumblebee effect.
Thank you, Ken. Before commencing my speech today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people here today. The speech I have for you this morning, it's nothing profound. It's not philosophical, and it's not even political. In fact, it's a speech about bees. Bumblebees, to be specific. Actually, come to think of it, depending on your opinion on bumblebees, maybe it is political, I don't know. It was about a month ago that I started on this speech, and at that time, I was at a loss. I recall sitting at the edge of my chair, computer sitting in front of me on my desk, staring at the blank, and don't tell my parents this, otherwise they'll make me clean it, but very dirty and scuffed wall in front of me, without any idea of what I should talk about today. I was at a loss for a topic. Mind completely blank, almost as if it had been wiped squeaky clean, not squeaky clean, which was very much the opposite of the wall in front of me. Sorry, Mum and Dad. That was until I turned my gaze to the left, out my window, and found myself staring at this funny little creature with a hairy striped body and comically small wings bumping over and over into the glass window pane just short of a metre in front of me. For about 10 seconds I watched this odd animal try with all its might, despite its several previous failures, to get through the closed window into my room. As you would expect, the insect, after a few more failures, eventually ended up losing interest and went about its own thing. But that 10-second performance by the bee was all I needed. It got me thinking, how does an insect with such a heavy body and such dainty little wings physically fly? How does it do it? And as it turned out, I was far from being the first to ask this question. After a bit of curious Googling, I discovered the first time this question was asked was in 1930 by French entomologist Auguste Magnin. It was in his publication that he noted that using the basic calculations of physics, engineering, and maths, the flight of a bumblebee actually comes out to be physically impossible. Now, before I go any further, I'd like to take a brief poll to see what everyone's thinking. I'd like everyone here today to make a quick prediction in their heads. I'd like you to predict whether or not, after almost a century, the question of whether a bee can fly, or the explanation of how a bee can fly, has been answered yet. So for those who predict that an explanation has been found, just raise your hand. Okay, about maybe a third of us, a fifth of us. And for those who think that an explanation hasn't been found yet, raise your hand. Okay, the majority of us. Well, drum roll, drum roll, drum roll. Those of you who predicted that an explanation has been found would be pleased to know that in 2001, many years later, a team of Chinese scientists successfully disproved Magnin's assertion and discovered that bees, according to the laws of physics, can in fact fly. They discovered that when running his calculations, Magnin, without consulting the anatomy of a bee, had assumed that bees have fixed wings similar to planes and thus generate much less power than they actually do. It was through this that the team of Chinese scientists proved that bees should physically be able to fly. Now at this point, I assume you're all probably wondering, Magnus, what does this little myth about some bee observed by a French scientist in 1930 have to do with anything, let alone Lions Club? Well, I suppose the reason I chose to talk about this particular topic was because I think there's a very powerful message behind this bumblebee enigma that we could translate across to our own lives and adopt in our own daily attitudes. It fascinates me to think that one seemingly insignificant bumblebee in the early 20th century had the right placement and the right timing to unintentionally set off a century-long chain reaction of myths about the entire existence of bees. It was after I watched the bee outside my window and explored that initial question of how does it actually fly that I realized just how powerful and instrumental individuals and their simple acts can be in orchestrating change. It was through that one bee that visited me on my windowsill that I realized just how transformative the what I've coined as bumblebee effect could be if you applied it to your life, everyday living, and set out every morning with the knowledge that your individual acts of kindness, care, compassion, or even just simple interest in other people could have the possibility of creating cultural shifts and new discoveries. Much like a ripple in water has a singular origin, a cultural shift or a social movement must too have an origin. Thank you.
Okay, please welcome Emily back to the lectern. And the speech title is The Anxiety Gender Gap.
When I was little, I was terrified of the dark because I was convinced that there was something lurking in the shadows. And I'll be honest, I'm still terrified. My dad says I'm overreacting and that I should turn on the light and see for myself. But honestly, I think that some things are best left in the dark. While I may be overreacting, the stereotype that women overreact because they are naturally more prone to expressing emotions than men has been long held. And while these emotional differences between men and women stem in truth from socialized gender roles, it has been used to construct the popular caricature of femininity that women are overly emotional and irrational. The widespread belief of this harmful stereotype prevents people from taking women seriously when they come forward with symptoms about health issues such as anxiety. Anxiety is already stigmatized by the media's trivialization of it as a common emotion, painting people with anxiety disorders as weak. In reality, it involves intense worry, stress, or fear that interferes with one's daily activities. And even though women are 11% more likely than men to have an anxiety disorder, women find it incredibly difficult to receive a proper diagnosis and treatment. This is called the anxiety gender gap, and it's become incredibly serious as it continually worsens. While the statistical dominance of anxiety in women may make it convenient to assume that steps have been undertaken to understand women's anxiety further and close the gap, the reality is that the stereotype that women are emotionally unstable worsens this gap and makes receiving a diagnosis for women much harder, as people often dismiss their symptoms as their overreactions. I can still remember that day in class, and I can still remember that moment when I could feel my throat close off, my hands start to shake, and a pain come into my chest. I had experienced a panic attack. But I was told by the doctor I was overreacting. I was told I was exaggerating my symptoms because I was being emotional. And I was told my panic attack was just my body's natural fear response and something I needed to control. I felt so humiliated, but most of all, I felt weak. When we stereotype women as emotionally unstable and irrational, it harms our perception of women's symptoms of anxiety, as serious symptoms are often invalidated as simply a result of their mental instability. Women thus become reluctant to reach out for help due to the fear of being dismissed as emotionally unstable, rendering them unable to receive the treatment they need. The dangers of undiagnosed anxiety were demonstrated when stigma prevented songstress Demi Lovato from receiving treatment for her anxiety, and it resulted in an eating disorder. In contrast, society's perception of strength is inherently expected in men through masculine traits, like not showing emotional responses. Society has constructed a narrative that turns a perception of weakness and anxiety into a gendered concept. and accumulates into a toxic cycle that continues to kick women while they are down, degrading their mental and physical health. We must reevaluate how we perceive strength in women, because in no way should having an anxiety disorder be ever perceived as a weakness. We need to start having more progressive, mainstream discourse about how society's narrative has negative impacts on women's anxiety, because that is how we close the gap.
Please welcome Huda back to the lectern. And her topic is Best of Both Worlds.
Barack Obama, Audrey Hepburn, Gillian Anderson, and Huda Zaidi. These 4 people, 3 who are well known and 1 who you're meeting for the first time, have something in common. Now I know you must be wondering, what can a 17-year-old Pakistani Australian and 3 A-list celebrities share? Well, like many first and second generation immigrant children, we are third culture kids, or TCKs for short. We are those children who grew up in a culture that was not their parents, and so they adopted a mixture of values from both, creating a new third culture. But there's something else that I share with the aforementioned A-listers. 10 bets to none, we've all had a particular experience that made us realize how we were different from the people around us. Mine started on a visit to my parents' birth country, when I walked into a family party to chat to my favorite cousins and gorge myself on delicious chicken tikkas. But suddenly, a relative said to me, "Oh, Huda, why do you wear a hijab? You live in Australia, so you should only dress like them." I stood shocked. Clearly, some relatives expected me to be their perception of more Australian than Pakistani, and I suddenly felt self-conscious. Were jeans not Western enough? Or maybe because I don't live permanently in Pakistan, I no longer have the right to wear a traditional kurta or my hijab? I couldn't stop thinking about this comment, and for a while, my confidence in that unique mixture of culture that defines me crumbled. Because to gain acceptance in society, there is a false concept that you must associate with one culture group. And this idea becomes bewildering for us TCKs. Living abroad shouldn't mean we should be deviating from the values instilled in us from birth. But when we're in our home country, we are again foreign. There's a part of us that doesn't seem to fit in. Maybe our accents, a value, our looks. So many TCKs assimilate into one culture, losing a part of themselves. Or they have to keep proving their very existence as a mixture of cultures over and over again. They can never just enjoy the best of both their worlds. But what is it in our society or our demeanor that alienates third culture kids? Research suggests that education systems worldwide do carry some blame. They develop future generations that are unable to empathize with people of different backgrounds. Let's take Australia, for example. At the tender primary school age, the only cultural understanding we are taught is colonial Australia and Federation. While there is nothing wrong with this, by itself, it's such a limited part of even Australian culture. We all know that the rich traditions of our Indigenous people started more than 60,000 years ago. And migration and the internet have brought a plethora of cultures closer to us. Yet, the future leaders and policymakers of our world come out of school none the wiser on how to interact with those of a different or new culture. They are simply not taught the skills. And when they grow up, these unequipped adults make those remarks like, "You don't look Australian, where are you actually from?" Or worse, racial insults and slurs, which to a young TCK could mean the crumbling of an identity they are still building. And some don't have the support systems to deal with it, leaving them vulnerable to self-depreciation and its consequences. In Britain, 90% of TCKs live in poverty from structural discrimination. But now, what can we do to resolve this issue and take advantage of the unique perspectives that TCKs bring? Firstly, better support institutions need to exist to help TCKs out in times of need. Secondly, our education systems worldwide need to change to incorporate meaningful, global culture experiences so that we can make a future generation free of discrimination. And finally, it comes down to each one of us keeping a track on how we are interacting with TCKs to stop stereotyping and take advantage of the perspectives and opportunities they bring. Culture is something that is just so beautiful, rich, and personalized, something every single person should be free to own and define. Without it, we are bland and lost. Our actions today could gift another 13-year-old girl the ability to enjoy the best of both her worlds. Thank you.
Okay, please welcome back to the lectern Eugenie. And Eugenie's speech topic is whose consequence?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. Growing up as a cyclist, I spent a great deal of time training out in my local roads. I've seen picturesque scenery on many frosty mornings. I felt regret riding into Guns Plains on a winter morning, knowing I wouldn't have feeling in my fingers for much longer. But my great love of cycling has not shielded me from the apparent polarising nature it has for some road users. The tendencies to rush past despite oncoming traffic, squeeze you off the road, or even roll down their window and really let you know what they're thinking. But irritation because roads are shared is not justification to abuse the power you have driving a 2-ton piece of machinery. Our roads are the pathways that allow us to travel to where we want to be. They facilitate community, connections with one another. They shouldn't be the reason someone's life, family, and future is torn apart. The mere seconds that a person looks to save can be the difference between safety and fatality. Which is why this has become an issue close to my heart and close to my hip, as some cars tend to be. So at what point can we rationalise the decision to prioritise our needs over the safety of another person? What privileges us to ignore such harsh realities? For the consequence of recklessness and impatience on our roads, the consequence is the lives of 44 Australian cyclists each year. The consequences of ignoring the risks and repercussions of our own actions extend far beyond those who have to pay the price within our own community. The economic problem states that how can a society satisfy the unlimited and competing wants of both individuals and community with only limited resources? The apparent answer to this? Outsourcing. The government establishes price floors, a minimum wage in the name of fair labour. To combat the financial repercussions of this, companies send production elsewhere. Made in China, a phrase all too familiar, but why? Why are so many of our goods produced in countries such as China? Sweatshops, where workers are forced to endure long hours in relentless conditions for the mere sense that they need to survive, allow our high demand for clothing to be met. To drive the price of production down, we look to where human rights protection is weak. Advanced industrial countries exploit the workers of developing countries. The consequence of facilitating our unlimited wants? The consequence is the 250 million children under the age of 15 forced to work in sweatshops in developing countries. Beyond the consequences of our actions are the consequences of our refusal to act in the aid of those who do not share the same rights as we do. In Australia, emphasis is placed on the need for accessible education for all children. But for many young girls around the world, their education is inaccessible, frowned upon, or even fought against. While we have the right to be educated, we cannot blatantly remain idle to those barred from it. In countries such as South Sudan, 73% of girls do not even get to attend primary school. In Niger, only 17% of girls and women are literate. The argument against the need for feminism in modern society turns a blind eye to the millions of women still living without rights. This ignorance is a demonstration of the extent to which we knowingly neglect the power we have to work towards fair rights for all women. Feminism is derived in the need to open up opportunities for women, focusing on suffrage and education. While this may have been achieved in some societies, for many women around the world this is not the case. Famously, Malala was shot in the head for fighting for her own right to be educated in Pakistan. Yet, as the Taliban has taken power in Afghanistan, women are yet again being denied their right to be educated. For the consequence of ignoring their fight for education, the consequence is the unknowns left in the lives of millions of women. The power we have because of our position in the world and our own society grants us the ability to fight for those left powerless, or turn a blind eye in the name of our own progress. We cannot continue to treat serious issues like trend cycles, jumping on board to spread awareness. But where does this awareness lead us if we don't turn it into active change? I'm not asking people to stand within firing distance of the Taliban. I'm not asking people to fight these issues single-handedly. But battles can be fought by changing our own actions. Thank you.
Well, that concludes our Youth of the Year presentation for this year. Our judges will now retire and come back with a decision on who will be our public speaker and our national winner for 2021. I don't envy their job one little bit. Can you please congratulate our 5 speakers? I know one of the big parts of conventions is that we have keynote speakers. Well, I think we've just had 5 keynote speakers.